On a warm, sunny afternoon in a quiet neighborhood park in Atlanta, 14-year-old Elijah Johnson sat peacefully on a weathered wooden bench, fully absorbed in the pages of his book. Tall for his age and lean from playing basketball, Elijah wore a simple white t-shirt and faded jeans, his scuffed sneakers resting lightly on the pavement. The park was alive with the cheerful sounds of children playing, nearby joggers passing by with earbuds in, and birds singing softly overhead, a place where Elijah often found calm and comfort. He was waiting patiently for his mother, Mayor Angela Johnson, who had promised to pick him up after her late meeting at City Hall. As the sun filtered through the towering oak trees, Elijah felt at ease, wrapped in the gentle warmth and familiar rhythm of the day. But across the park, a woman named Karen Mitchell watched Elijah with a sharp, suspicious gaze. Karen, a woman in her mid-40s with tightly pulled-back hair and a buttoned-up blouse, clutched her purse tightly as she stared at Elijah, her eyes narrowing whenever he shifted or glanced up from his book. What began as quiet observation quickly turned into suspicion. Karen whispered into her phone, dialing the police with accusations that Elijah was loitering and acting strangely, assumptions rooted not in fact but in fear. Elijah's peaceful afternoon was about to be shattered by an encounter none of them would soon forget. The calm atmosphere of Riverside Park in Atlanta quickly shifted when the police arrived. Elijah Johnson, a thoughtful and respectful 14-year-old boy, found himself under intense scrutiny simply for sitting quietly and waiting for his mother. Karen Mitchell's call to the police based on unfounded suspicion had set in motion an event that would deeply affect Elijah and the community. Two officers arrived in marked patrol cars, their flashing red and blue lights slicing through the afternoon calm. Officer Mark Stevens was young and appeared confident, his uniform crisp and his movements sharp. His partner, Sergeant James Palmer, was older and more experienced, moving with a measured calm that contrasted with his younger colleague. As they approached Elijah, their demeanor was serious, bordering on confrontational. Officer Stevens commanded Elijah to keep his hands visible, while Sergeant Palmer observed quietly from a distance. "Hands where I can see them," Officer Stevens ordered firmly. Elijah complied without hesitation, his heart pounding. Despite his calm exterior, fear and confusion churned inside him. "I'm not doing anything wrong, sir," he said, his voice steady but trembling slightly. Officer Stevens wasn't convinced. He kept a watchful eye on Elijah, whose simple presence seemed to raise alarms. The officers questioned Elijah relentlessly, their tone cold and unwelcoming. "What are you doing here?" "Where's your ID?" Stevens demanded. Elijah explained patiently that he was only waiting for his mother, the mayor, who was running late from a city meeting. "I don't carry ID," he said softly. "I'm only 14. Despite Elijah's clear and respectful responses, the officers maintained their suspicion. The flashing lights and commanding voices drew a small crowd. Nearby park visitors stopped what they were doing, some whispering among themselves, others pulling out phones to record the encounter. The tension in the air was palpable. Karen Mitchell stood nearby, arms crossed and lips tight, watching the scene unfold with a sense of satisfaction. She had made the call, and now the police were handling what she perceived as a threat. However, her assumptions were based solely on Elijah's race and presence in the park, not on any real evidence. As Officer Stevens edged closer to Elijah, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon, the boy's chest tightened with fear. Every command felt like an accusation. Sergeant Palmer finally stepped in, placing a calming hand on Stevens' shoulder. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he advised, casting a wary glance at Karen. "Did you actually see this young man do anything suspicious, or is this just an assumption?" Karen faltered. "He was just sitting there," she admitted reluctantly, her voice losing its earlier confidence. "But I know the type." Sergeant Palmer raised his eyebrows, a quiet challenge in his tone. "The type? This is a public park. Everyone has a right to be here." Karen's face flushed with embarrassment and shame. The realization that she had acted out of fear and prejudice rather than fact began to sink in. The crowd around them grew quieter, sensing the weight of the moment. Meanwhile, Elijah remained composed, though inside he was trembling. He addressed Karen directly. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just reading and waiting for my mom." His voice was steady, but held the pain of unfair judgment. The officers began to reassess the situation. Sergeant Palmer spoke quietly to his partner, acknowledging that they had let assumptions cloud their judgment. The tension slowly eased as it became clear Elijah was no threat. Yet the damage to Elijah's dignity had already been done. This encounter was not just a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of the systemic bias and racial profiling that many young black boys face daily. Elijah's experience echoed far beyond Riverside Park, touching on a broader issue of prejudice in communities across the country. As the officers prepared to step back, a sleek black SUV pulled up near the park entrance. The crowd's murmur grew into whispers of recognition as Mayor Angela Johnson, Elijah's mother, emerged. Her commanding presence brought immediate calm and authority to the scene. The arrival of the mayor shifted everything. She quickly approached her son and the officers, her voice firm yet controlled. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her eyes sharp and unwavering. Officer Stevens and Sergeant Palmer straightened, suddenly aware of the gravity of the situation. Mayor Johnson's stature as a respected community leader added weight to her words. She stood firmly beside Elijah, offering him a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Karen Mitchell's earlier bravado vanished in the face of Mayor Johnson's authority. The woman looked small and uncertain as the mayor began to ask pointed questions about why her son was treated with suspicion and why assumptions were allowed to dictate police action. This moment marked a turning point not only for Elijah but for the entire community. It exposed the painful reality of bias and set the stage for demands of accountability, change, and healing. Just as the tension in Riverside Park reached its peak, a sleek black SUV pulled up quietly at the park entrance. From the vehicle stepped Mayor Angela Johnson, a poised and commanding figure known throughout Atlanta for her dedication to the community. The moment she arrived, the energy around the scene shifted noticeably. People stopped in their tracks, whispers of recognition rippled through the gathered crowd, and even the police officers seemed to stand a little straighter. Mayor Johnson's presence was a powerful reminder that the young boy at the center of the confrontation was not just any teenager. He was her son, Elijah Johnson. With purposeful strides, she walked directly toward the officers and her son, her gaze firm and unwavering. Elijah, still tense but relieved, looked up to see his mother approaching. The weight of the earlier humiliation clung to him, but her presence gave him a glimmer of comfort. "What is going on here?" Mayor Johnson asked, her voice steady but edged with controlled anger. Her tone carried the unmistakable authority of a woman used to commanding respect in City Hall. Officer Mark Stevens and Sergeant James Palmer immediately straightened, recognizing the importance of the moment. The young officer's earlier confidence was replaced by a visible nervousness, while Sergeant Palmer, more seasoned and calm, took a respectful step back. Mayor Johnson turned her sharp gaze first to the officers, then to Karen Mitchell, the woman whose baseless suspicion had sparked this entire ordeal. Karen, who had moments before stood rigid and proud, now appeared small and uncertain. Her earlier bravado faded as she met the mayor's unwavering eyes. "I want answers," Mayor Johnson demanded, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Why was my son treated like a suspect in his own community? Why was he questioned and accused without cause?" Sergeant Palmer cleared his throat and began to explain that they had responded to a call about a suspicious person and were following procedure. But Mayor Johnson's expression hardened. "Does your procedure include intimidating a frightened 14-year-old child without any evidence?" she challenged. "Does it allow officers to make assumptions based on the color of his skin rather than facts?" The officers were silent. Officer Stevens shifted uncomfortably. Mayor Johnson's questions laid bare the flaws in the system, the routine way. Bias can seep into decisions, turning innocent moments into traumatic experiences. Karen Mitchell, too, struggled to respond. "I didn't mean to cause harm," she murmured. I was scared." Mayor Johnson looked at her thoughtfully. "Fear is understandable," she said, "but it's no excuse for assuming someone is dangerous because of their appearance. Your assumptions could have cost my son his dignity, or worse." The weight of those words settled heavily over everyone present. Mayor Johnson then turned back to the officers. "This can't happen again. I want a full investigation and a review of your protocols. More importantly, I want every officer in this precinct to undergo anti-bias training immediately." Sergeant Palmer nodded solemnly. "I take full responsibility for how this was handled," he said. "We'll make sure training happens and gaps are addressed." Mayor Johnson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Training is the bare minimum," she said firmly. "I want real change, not just paperwork. Our community deserves better." The crowd watching the exchange murmured in agreement. The mayor's leadership brought a clear message: bias and injustice would no longer be tolerated under her watch. As the situation began to calm, Karen Mitchell quietly spoke up. "I'll take the training," she said, voice low and sincere. "I want to do better." Mayor Johnson gave a small nod. "Running away from your mistakes won't fix anything," she said. "Owning up and learning is the first step." With the crowd beginning to disperse, Mayor Johnson put a reassuring hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Let's go home," she said gently. Elijah felt a mixture of relief and lingering hurt, but walked beside his mother with his head held a little higher. This encounter would leave a lasting impression on the community, a moment when leadership, courage, and accountability intersected to confront systemic bias. Mayor Johnson's unwavering defense of her son marked the beginning of a journey toward justice, change, and hope for a safer, more inclusive future for all children in Atlanta. The confrontation in Riverside Park had exposed a painful truth. Systemic racial bias still lingered deeply within many communities, including Atlanta. Mayor Angela Johnson knew this incident with her son Elijah was not just an isolated misunderstanding, but a glaring example of the urgent need for change in how law enforcement interacts with people of color. Determined to prevent such an ordeal from happening again, Mayor Johnson wasted no time. Within hours, she convened an emergency meeting with the city's police chief and other key officials. The atmosphere in the City Hall conference room was tense but focused, filled with community leaders, law enforcement representatives, and civic advocates who recognized the importance of the moment. Yesterday's incident was unacceptable. Mayor Johnson began, her voice firm yet calm. Our community deserves safety and respect, not suspicion and fear. It's clear we must do more than respond after the fact. We have to be proactive. The police chief acknowledged the need for improvement but cautioned that meaningful change would require time, resources, and training. Implementing anti-bias programs is complex, he said carefully. We want to get it right, but we need support. Mayor Johnson was unyielding. Time is a luxury we do not have, she responded sharply. How many more children must face humiliation or worse before we act decisively? This isn't just about one call to the police, it's about transforming a culture. Her words resonated deeply with Sergeant James Palmer, one of the officers involved in the earlier incident. He spoke up with conviction. The mayor is right. This isn't a one-off mistake. It's part of a much larger problem. If we don't act now, we risk repeating these failures over and over. Plans quickly took shape. Mayor Johnson insisted on the immediate rollout of comprehensive anti-bias training for every officer in the precinct. The program would include lessons on empathy, cultural awareness, and the impact of implicit biases. Police would learn how to approach situations with greater understanding and respect, aiming to rebuild trust with the community. But the mayor's vision went beyond the police force. She reached out to schools, businesses, and community groups to foster a citywide movement against prejudice. Educational programs for children and adults alike would teach the importance of inclusion and challenge stereotypes at every level. Meanwhile, the story of Elijah's experience spread throughout the city, sparking conversations in homes, churches, and community centers. People began to share their own stories of bias and discrimination, breaking long-held silences. The incident had become a catalyst for dialogue and healing. Elijah himself found new strength in speaking out. He joined panels at local schools to talk about his experience and the importance of standing up against injustice. Though the memory of that painful afternoon lingered, he felt empowered knowing his voice was making a difference. Even Karen Mitchell, the woman whose suspicion had triggered the police response, took steps to learn and grow. She enrolled in the anti-bias training program and volunteered at a nearby youth center, determined to understand the community she had misjudged. Her journey was not easy, but it reflected the potential for change when individuals confront their own prejudices. The path ahead was long and uncertain, but Mayor Johnson remained resolute. In a public address to the community, she acknowledged the challenges, but emphasized hope and commitment. Change is never easy, she said, but it is necessary. Together we can build a city where every person feels safe, respected, and valued. As weeks turned into months, the anti-bias initiatives began to take root. Officers returned from training with new perspectives. Schools embraced inclusion programs, and community events promoted understanding and unity. Riverside Park itself slowly regained its peaceful spirit, becoming a place where families of all backgrounds could gather without fear. For Elijah and his mother, the journey was deeply personal. They knew this was just one step in a larger fight for justice and equality. But it was a step forward, a sign that with courage, leadership, and community effort, change was possible. The days following the incident at Riverside Park brought a mix of emotions and reflection for Elijah Johnson. The unfair suspicion and police questioning had left a deep impression, but amid the pain, a cautious hope began to emerge. This hope was sparked by an unexpected gesture from Karen Mitchell, the woman whose mistrust had ignited the confrontation. Karen had reached out quietly, wanting to express her regret in person. She approached Elijah one afternoon near the same bench where the ordeal had unfolded. Her appearance had changed. Her hair was less perfectly styled, and her face showed signs of sleepless nights and deep thought. The proud and stern woman who once looked at Elijah with suspicion now spoke softly, her voice carrying a tone of sincere remorse. "Elijah," she began hesitantly, "I know I already apologized, but I wanted to say it again in person. I was wrong about you. About everything." Her eyes searched his face for a sign of forgiveness, but Elijah remained cautious. The hurt ran deep, and trust was not something to be given lightly. Karen continued, "I've been attending the anti-bias training your mother helped organize. It's been eye-opening. I didn't realize how much fear and assumptions were shaping how I saw people like you. What I thought was harmless was actually harmful." Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, revealing the weight of her realization. Elijah listened carefully as Karen shared how she had begun volunteering at the nearby youth center, working with children who, like him, deserved respect and understanding. "I want to do better," she said earnestly. "I want to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else." Though Elijah wasn't ready to forgive fully, he acknowledged her effort. "I'm glad you're trying," he said quietly, "but it's going to take time for me and probably for you too." Karen smiled softly, appreciating his honesty. Their exchange wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a meaningful step toward healing. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of the incident and the mayor's response continued to shape the community. At City Hall, Mayor Angela Johnson addressed a packed room of community leaders, police officials, and concerned citizens. Standing at the podium, she made it clear that the incident was not isolated but a reflection of deeper issues. "Last week's events were a wake-up call," she said firmly. "This is about respect, dignity, and justice for all. We must act boldly to ensure no child in our city faces the humiliation Elijah endured." The mayor unveiled a new anti-bias training program designed not only for police officers but for schools, businesses, and community organizations. The goal was clear: to educate everyone about prejudice, to foster empathy, and to build bridges across divides. The community responded with cautious optimism. Schools introduced lessons on inclusion and respect, and Elijah himself became a young advocate, sharing his story at panels and events. His courage inspired many to confront their own biases and work toward change. Karen's participation in the training and her volunteering symbolized a hopeful beginning. Though mistrust lingered, small steps were creating openings for dialogue and understanding. The journey ahead was challenging, but the community was no longer silent. One evening, Elijah and his mother sat together on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The day's struggles felt distant for a moment, replaced by a quiet peace. "Do you really think things will get better?" Elijah asked softly. Mayor Johnson smiled gently. "Change takes time, but yes, I believe it will. Sometimes all it takes is a single moment of courage to start something new." Elijah nodded slowly, feeling a newfound strength in those words. The park, once a place of fear and suspicion, was beginning to feel like a place of hope, a place where respect and understanding could grow. As the city moved forward, the story of Elijah and the lessons learned from that afternoon in the park served as a powerful reminder. Change is possible when communities face their fears and choose to grow together. In the weeks following the troubling incident at Riverside Park, the quiet neighborhood of Atlanta began to buzz with conversations about justice, fairness, and community. Elijah Johnson, the young boy whose simple act of waiting for his mother had spiraled into a painful ordeal, found himself at the center of a growing movement for change. The story had touched many hearts, and with Mayor Angela Johnson leading the charge, the city was taking concrete steps to confront the systemic bias that had marred Elijah's experience. The mayor's call for accountability resonated beyond City Hall, reaching schools, churches, businesses, and community centers throughout the city. Mayor Johnson understood that true change would require more than words; it would require action. She worked tirelessly with the police chief and city officials to implement a mandatory anti-bias training program for all officers in the precinct. This program was designed not only to educate, but also to transform attitudes, helping officers recognize and overcome unconscious prejudices. But the mayor's vision went further. She partnered with local schools to introduce lessons on empathy, inclusion, and respect for diversity. Community groups were encouraged to hold open forums and discussions, creating safe spaces where residents could share their experiences and learn from one another. Elijah himself became a young voice for change. Though the memory of being wrongly accused still lingered, he found strength in speaking out. He participated in school panels and community meetings, sharing his story with honesty and courage. His words inspired others to reflect on their own biases and to commit to building a more just community. The woman at the center of the original accusation, Karen Mitchell, took her own steps toward growth. She attended the anti-bias training sessions and volunteered at a local youth center, determined to make amends and better understand the community she had once feared. Her journey was not without struggle, but it showed the power of acknowledgement and education in breaking down barriers. Slowly, the atmosphere in Riverside Park began to change. The smiles and nods from familiar faces reassured Elijah that progress was possible. The park was becoming a place where children and families from all backgrounds could gather without fear of suspicion or judgment. One evening, as Elijah and Mayor Johnson sat on their porch watching the sunset, he voiced a quiet concern. "Do you really think this will work, that things will really get better?" The mayor looked at him with warmth and conviction. "Change takes time, Elijah, but every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. What happened to you sparked something important, a conversation and a commitment to do better." Elijah nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words. He knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but for the first time he felt hopeful. The incident at Riverside Park had exposed painful truths about bias and injustice, but it had also ignited a movement of education, accountability, and healing. Mayor Johnson's leadership and Elijah's courage reminded the city that progress is possible when communities come together to face difficult realities and work toward a better future. As the city continued its journey, Riverside Park stood as a symbol not just of the challenges faced, but of the promise that through understanding and unity, a safer and more inclusive community could grow for generations to come. Weeks after the difficult day at Riverside Park, Elijah Johnson felt a mix of emotions. Though the hurt of being unfairly judged still lingered, he began to notice a change in the way people treated him. Familiar faces greeted him with warm smiles and nods of encouragement. Even Karen Mitchell, the woman who had once accused him, was making an effort to change, attending training sessions and volunteering in the community. Elijah knew forgiveness wouldn't come quickly, but he appreciated the first steps toward healing. Sitting on the porch with his mother, Mayor Angela Johnson, Elijah shared his doubts and hopes about the future. His mother reminded him that real change takes time and courage, but every small step counts. Together, they dreamed of a community where every child could feel safe and valued, no matter who they were or where they came from. Though the road ahead would be long, Elijah was ready to face it with newfound strength, hope, and the support of those who believed in justice and understanding. Life lesson with emotional tone and call to action. This story teaches us a powerful lesson. Change begins with courage, the courage to speak out, to listen, and to grow. Sometimes healing takes time, and forgiveness is a journey, not a moment. But every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to a world where respect and kindness triumph over fear and suspicion. If Elijah's story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about empathy and justice in our communities. And if you want to hear more inspiring stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and join our family. Together we can build a better, kinder world, one story at a time.